myself because I'm having some issues with my camera. I don't know what happened, so I can turn it on. That's the first thing. Second, thank you for the space we're having right now, for your time, for giving us this interview. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. Cool. So let's start. Well, Christian. First of all, for the people that doesn't know like the context of the work you're doing, the things you're working on right now, and where you come from, we would like a small review so people can
Sure.
know a little bit more about you.
Sure, sounds good. So my name's Christian Roberts. I run a consulting firm that's in Canada and the United Kingdom, and we specialize only in one thing, which is to help the arts and creative sectors kind of function more economically. We help them grow. So I do that work around the world in really every market on every continent. In fact, in the last 2 months, I've been to every continent except for 4 months, every continent except for Antarctica to try to help them grow a games industry. So, so my company does this across all of the creative industries, and I specifically focus on games. So that's who I am. I've been doing this for about 17 years, which is makes me feel old every time I say it because my career could almost vote, which is makes me feel really old. So yeah, that's where I come to it from. So I'm
Okay.
pleased to meet with you. Pleased to meet with you this morning to talk a little bit more about the games industry.
Okay. Okay. Pretty cool. Okay. So let's start. We want you to tell us about the video game ecosystem in Canada, for example.
Great. Well, I mean, Canada's my home territory. I'm calling you from there right now. Canada's home to some of the world's largest games companies. So you think about Ubisoft in Montreal, Electronic Arts, EA in British Columbia. That's Columbia with a U because they spell it wrong up there. And these companies make some of the world's largest game franchises. You can think of Assassin's Creed or FIFA or Mass Effect or Dragon Age or take your pick. All of these are made in Canada. Those companies are not owned by Canadians. They're often publicly traded, or they're based in either France or the United States, but they have large workforces in Canada. At the same time, Canada also has hundreds and hundreds of indie developers. Cuphead, Don't Starve are sort of more historical titles, maybe like Guacamelee also. More recently, you would have seen Nightingale come out from a province of Alberta, or the I don't exactly know how somebody managed to make a roguelike poker deck builder called
Yeah.
Balatro, which is currently kind of taking the world by storm, which is from somewhere in Canada. The individual creator of that game hasn't yet revealed where they're from, but they're from somewhere in this country. So that's like those are the games that we make, but it's important to recognize that all those games in that industry has grown with the support of both Canada's national government and of all the local provincial governments that are littered across our country. And that support it comes in a couple of different ways. There's sort of direct funding, from folks from institutions like the Canada Media Fund, which sort of give developers, Canadian-based developers, some funds to do prototyping or production or marketing, or more commonly what we call labor-based rebates, which are present in most Canadian provinces, which just basically the government gives you back some of your money that you've spent on people who make games. And of course, as we know, the primary input cost, the primary thing that allows games companies to make games are really creative, talented people. So yeah, that's a brief overview of what it's like in Canada.
Okay. Okay. Um, like it's pretty cool since this is like a personal experience of mine right now. I lived 1 year in Canada, more exactly in Montreal. So I have some, like a little bit, just a little bit of this experience. I went there to study video games, so I understand what you're talking about. And yeah, there are some pretty big
Yeah,
companies out there.
there's like 15,000 people working in the video game industry just in Montreal alone. So I
Yeah,
mean, it's going to be a little bit more, a little bit less, but like it's a small town. Like if you think of like a small city or a small town, like an entire town just making video games.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
According to your experience in the sector, what do you think will be the most demanded service in 2024?
It's a super interesting question. I mean, I think what I'm going to take is like services. I'm going to sort of take that as kind of what kinds of games do you think are going to be more successful. And overall, like I'm a big fan of IP or intellectual property, and I think that overall there's going to continue to be more consumer demand or more demand for good IP, and I think that that's. At the same time, I think that the global market is reaching or has reached a kind of saturation point with live service games, sort of your Destinies and more, notwithstanding the recent success of a couple of fights against the automatons. I think there's only so many of those games that you can sell at the same time. Like you can, there's nothing wrong with those games. I love them. I mean, I'm a Diablo addict, so don't get me wrong, but
Nice.
you can't be a Diablo addict and also a Helldivers addict, right? So there's only
True.
so many of those games that you can do at the same time. And so I think that in that context, the demand for games with stronger narratives, but that still have some elements of some social elements of replayability will be the most demand. So I mean, the most obvious example of that is Baldur's Gate 3 last year, which combines a really strong narrative with the fact that you can play it 100 times and find 100 different experiences. At the same time, I think one of the things that makes IP really, really interesting is that it allows for narratives to feature sort of culturally authentic but not corny elements, and those that do that are sort of more likely to succeed. I think will be more likely to succeed.
Okay. Perfect. There are like, well, yesterday we were thinking about it. There are some games, like service that they're still not making it. The most recent example is Skull and Bones. We were asking ourselves, why do you think this game was like not so successful, and the Assassin's Creed Black Flag went like boom to the sky right now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, I think you got a couple different questions wrapped up in one, and I think that. I think looking at live service games, you might want to look at more like Suicide Squad as a good example of kind of like a pretty standard live service game. And it's basically like, I played it and I couldn't tell the difference between that and the Marvel's Avengers, sort of the same feel, but a different group of superheroes or supervillains, as the case may be. And I guess it's sort of like, it's nothing new. It's kind of like you could be playing Destiny. It's the same game. It's the same kind of looter shooter mindset. And the fact that King Shark has guns makes no sense. Anyways, that's just gonna bite you. But I think for Skull and Bones, I think I can give you my opinion, and that's that I think it deviated from what people wanted in the first place. The whole point of what made Skull and Bones an interesting idea was that it would be, an extrapolation from the best part of arguably the best Assassin's Creed game, the naval combat, right? And it simplified the best part of the game it was trying to create, right? So, the fact that you can't board ships, that's a cutscene. The fact that you've got, you can only really pick between however many, like a dozen ships or however many ships there are. It kind of oversimplified the part of the game that made it interesting, and then started focusing on weird stuff like, whether people were yelling at you as you were coming into port. So that hypothesis for me is sort of substantiated to a degree, as you said, by people going back to play the original game, right? So they're like, well, actually, no, this didn't do what we wanted to, so let's go back and play the part we wanted to and go sing sea shanties and board ships. And then, don't get me wrong, I played the ever-loving crap out of Assassin's Creed 4 for exactly that reason. So I was super excited about Skull and Bones, and then as I started to see all the press come out, it started to deviate farther and farther away from the thing that I really enjoyed. And then I'm not surprised. The other thing that I'd point out is that development hell, which is sort of when something goes into development and doesn't really seem to ever want to come out, and you've got multiple different recuts of the scope of the game, like it almost never ends well, right? When you start with a game and 8 years later you produce a game, Duke Nukem Forever, I mean, like, is the most obvious example, but like it almost never ends well. It almost never ends with a success because the market's moved on, tastes have changed, the people on the project have changed 5 times over. So it's really hard to succeed in that kind of development cycle.
Okay, perfect. Well, what is your perspective of the video game sector here in Colombia?
Right. Well, first, let me give Invest in Bogota a shout out because they provided me with some good information. And according to Invest in Bogota, there's Colombia has received about 14 new expansion investment projects valued at about $30 million US over the course of the last 10 years, I should say, and which generated just under 800 jobs in the country, making it at the same time it's got a pretty strong market in Latin America, accounting for about just under 10% of revenue in the region. So it's a strong market. People like to play games, but also thanks to Invest in Bogota, I had the opportunity late last year to come and visit, which was even more important to me because I got to go and talk to actual game companies. And I was really struck by sort of the opportunity that is presented by the game sector in Colombia. So traditionally, or not traditionally, but a lot of game companies have traditionally worked on paid service work. So fee for service, doing co-development, outsourcing for other companies around the world. And they've developed really strong technical skills and creative skills. And then they're starting to think about really cool ideas for intellectual property. Remember like how much I love IP, and I think that's the sort of vision for the future.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they were saying, look, I'm just going to produce my content and put it in the marketplace. And the skill sets required for being a co-development studio or an external developer are very different than those that are needed to sort of sell and market and build community around your own IP. And so I was really struck by both the potential and the sort of challenge. So if you can imagine moving from like 12 customers, if you're like an external development studio, you work with 12 or maybe 20 other developers to 120,000 customers. They're all yelling at you to do stuff. It's a very different, a very different kind of mindset that's required. So it was the opportunity, but also the support needed and guidance to offset some of the risks that are, that these studios are going to take as they jump into the world of intellectual property. But again, I mean, that risk, that potential is real. And as I said earlier, that's what I think, at least, that sort of culturally authentic, interesting, different IP that's going to have the biggest chance of success going forward. So, now's the time to support the industry is basically what I'm saying.
Okay, perfect. Why the emerging technologies are crucial to the video game sector?
I mean, like, really, this is just the AI question, right? You're just talking to me about AI, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's so yes, AI, right? To be clear, though, I'm not a huge fan of Web3. Excuse me. Not that there's anything wrong with the tech. Excuse me.
No
but one moment. Sorry about that. No, there's nothing wrong with the tech. I mean, I have nothing wrong with it, but it always just seemed like a bunch of tools looking for some sort of nails and screws to hammer or screw, depending on but it was like not use case driven. It was technology driven. So AI, on the other hand, has been around in games for like ever, right? I mean, I can still remember complaining about the dodgy AI in Command and Conquer like a million years ago because I'm super old, as I covered earlier. But it's not new. But I think the impact of generative AI is already being seen for both good and less good impacts, right? Particularly as it relates to concept art or game art in general. And I think it can have a really good use, right? Like I think for early concept development, for rapid prototyping, it was a lot of good uses for it. But of course, the danger is people using art without attribution and not paying artists. These are all real concerns. But I do think that particularly in my mindset of thinking around IP, is like, okay, well, we've got an idea for a game. How would it look? And you could just like get your generative AI bot to create that image, that background, that story world really quickly to see if it's worth pursuing. I think that's going to be really cool. I also think that, so beyond AI, I also think that there's some important sort of peripheral and hardware design, particularly as it relates to accessibility devices and being able, and just sort of approaches to game design that will allow for more different people to play games. Because as we kind of think through saturated markets, as I was talking about, sort of live service, we always have to think about, okay, who's not playing games and how can we help them play games? And so, you look at what Microsoft is, and others are putting into sort of controller design, even to try to allow for people who have less mobility to be able to access the game world. I also think that's super important.
Okay, pretty cool. Which are the 3 keys to build the industry games you want?
Yeah, well, it's almost like this is the question that comes from the talk that I gave while I was in Colombia for Colombia 4.0. But I think there's 3. Yeah, I mean, to break it down in 3 ways, the first thing you need to do is figure out what you want to accomplish. If you want to employ a bunch of people, but don't necessarily care about owning things, then there's a certain set of tools that you can use, and those are sort of the tax offset things that Canadians use. On the other hand, if you want to promote the successful creation and exploitation of intellectual property, there are other tools that you want to use. So that first step of like, okay, actually, what does the vision of success look like? Is it a bunch of people employed by American companies, or is it maybe fewer people employed, but by Colombian companies that are drawing money in from the international market? Like, that's a vision that you have to see. And of course, it's not one or the other particularly, but there's a balance, and the tools you use are different. The next thing you need to consider is, that when you put a plan in place, all the pieces of that plan fit together. So when I was in Colombia, one of the things I was struck by is that there's a variety of different organizations that are trying to do one thing for games, but they don't connect to any of the other things for games that need that. So you might have an incubation program, but no one thinks about what happens to the incubatees after they leave the program. So what are they going to do? They're just probably going to leave Colombia because now they know all about how to make games. They're going to go to a place that has a tax credit, has some direct funding or whatever. So you have to figure out how those pieces all fit together. And then the last thing you need to do is find the right people to orchestrate the thing. There's one thing to have a great program or a great series of programs on a whiteboard, all the right arrows going to all the right places, but ultimately you need the real people to be empowered to implement these programs and ensure that they work together with all the other, all of those programs work together. So again, just the first thing is, what do I want to accomplish? Make sure all the pieces of the plan fit together, and then make sure that you have the right people empowered to actually undertake those programs. Failure at any one of those 3 things, and it just won't work.
Okay, excellent. Well, how to expedite the formalization process of gaming activities in Colombia?
Right. Well, I mean, to talk about gaming activities, obviously, I'm going to talk less about playing games or esports. I'm going to talk about making games because that's what I speak to, and ultimately, it will take a village. It will take a lot of different organizations, from maybe Imaginas to look at who are already into the tax credit type of funding support game. You might have city or level folks that are doing incubators or educational institutions or creating game design courses. You might have, but it's going to need an organization, something like an Invest in Bogota, that could play a coordination role and help to bring that village together. Because villages don't necessarily all convene in a place unless there's somebody telling them to. And then once they're there, it's going to be important that there's a chairperson or some sort of leadership around that table to really pull this through. That was my sort of third point earlier, is that you need to have, there needs to be somebody keeping everybody in line, cracking the whip from time to time. And so I think that's what's going to be required for, the support then to exist to help Colombia best access those sort of global markets, draw in all of that export revenue, and ultimately build a sustainable games industry. Of course, this sounds daunting, but it's not impossible. It's what every other country who's decided to support their games industry has done, to greater or lesser degrees of effectiveness. But it is that sort of bringing the band together is a necessary precondition to building the games industry that we all want to see in Colombia.
Okay. Well, right now, can I ask you like three more things about your opinion?
Sure,
Okay,
sure.
cool. First of all, having said all of this, there's a lot of work you having right now. Uh, do you have time to play games actually?
I make the time. I bought a Steam Deck over the holidays, and whenever I'm on a plane, you'll see me playing probably Baldur's Gate 3 because it plays really well on a Steam Deck. So yeah, I do. I find that I make the time, and there's always that magic window between when you put the kids to bed and then when you have to go to bed. And sometimes you can squeeze in some between episodes of Shogun or whatever. I'll find some time to play some games.
Okay. Okay, cool. Well, about playing games, have you played Pal World?
Have I played which?
The Pal World, the
No,
one
I
with the
haven't played Palo.
Pokemon with
No, I
guns.
haven't. It's that there's a it falls into the category of games that if I like it, I will have a problem.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, like through. Okay, okay,
no, it's like so as I said, I'm still a Diablo. Yeah, I'm still a Diablo addict. I still play Diablo 4. I could have opinions about various seasons, but I can't. When my own experience is that I have because I have limited time. I was saying earlier, there's only so many sort of live service or endlessly playable games that I can play at the same time without feeling like I'm falling behind in all of them. Right. So I think that monopoly model on like kind of they're all trying to monopolize your life. So I got to pick one at a time. And so for me, it's hard to kick the Diablo habit. And even though I'm going to try to kick it with Last Epic or something, I'm going to kick it with another version of the same game.
yeah,
So, that's probably next for me is if and when Last Epic gets to be Steam Deck approved, because they're working on their controller support. That's probably my next. I'll probably put some hours into that because it's fun to blow things up on a little screen.
okay. And last but not least, isn't it worrying a little bit for the industry with all these big companies firing people? Is it safe to invest in video games right now?
Yeah. Okay. That's a good question. The answer is, the short answer is yes, but I think this is where I might have to. I didn't mention at the beginning that I'm an economist and I have a couple of degrees in economics, but that's an economics question, not a games industry question. So, 2 years ago, at the height of when money was free, it was cheaper to put your money in anywhere than to keep it in the bank. Because we're dealing with what's called effectively negative interest rates. So you have to pay money for somebody to hold on to your money. So what happened was that you had to give all of the people with money had to find cool places to put their money. And at the same time, you had some really great success stories coming out of the games industry. So they pumped a bunch of money into games. About 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. If you think about what the sort of dev cycle is on a sort of double to small AAA game, it's sort of 2.5, 3 years, right? So we're seeing the kind of all of that money run out all at the same time, and nobody reinvesting the cheap money. That doesn't mean that the industry is actually smaller than it was. If you look at consumer spending, take a look at consumer spending, and then you correct for the Chinese market, because of course China took the decision to make it harder for people to play games. Then the consumer growth continues to grow. So you're like, okay, well, people are still spending more money. They're not spending less money, not buying fewer games than they did. We just made too many because we overinvested. So that doesn't mean it's not a good idea to invest in games. It just means that those investments should be smarter. They should be less just make the same game as everybody else, less reliance on yet another live service game that looks like all the other live service games, and more on how do I differentiate myself in a crowded marketplace. How do I create a community of interest around my game that's really compelling, where like they actually want to talk about it and, share insights or strategies. So those are all still really like the fundamentals are still there. The opportunity for games is still there. It's just we're kind of dealing with bad money, and it's almost now like the games industry is kind of like as we come out of, or as we can continue to come out of this sort of impact of cheap money, is that we all kind of have to grow up at the same time. And this kind of more thoughtful investment, more evidence-driven investment that you're starting to see publishers or investors take to the games industry, sort of like how every other industry works, where you actually have to provide them with some evidence that your thing is going to make money, as opposed to, well, it's a game. The last game made a lot of money. I guess I should give you some money, right? So in some ways, I think the industry, yes, layoffs hurt, and I don't want to make light of the impact that has on actual people. But in some ways, I think the industry will be better off having gone through this pain and realize that cheap money, that just making things, just like taking whatever you can from people and making stuff, ultimately doesn't create a sustainable industry. Sorry for your minor economics lesson there, but
no. It's perfect. It's perfect, as we're gonna talk all about this in the program. So it's perfect. Christian, thank you very much for your time. Like,
no
this
worries,
was
man.
really a really good moment. Like, we could keep talking all day long, but we can't since
I
we have
appreciate
limited
it. Yeah,
time.
well, and if you're doing your cuts or whatever, and you think, hey, like I need another piece of background, or can you fill in a gap somewhere? Let me know, and I'll we'll jump on a call and we'll get it done.
Okay, that'll be awesome. So thank you very
Yeah.
much again for your
I've
time.
been in your shoes before. I'd be like, shit, I should have asked that follow up. So I know how it goes.
No, well, we're gonna, like, if you have the time, like, we're gonna keep talking. Believe me, like, this is really, really interesting, and there are a lot of things that I left outside of this interview right now. But the time is really short for us since radio doesn't give us that much time. But yeah, it's awesome, like, to have the time to speak to to a person that really knows about the game industry, about all this stuff, also economics, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of money in game with video games, and people,
200 billion US dollars, something around there.
yeah, like, people doesn't realize, like, really doesn't realize what's behind all the video game industry. They think that just someone sitting there making some programming, modeling, and that's it. You have a video
Yeah.
game.
Yeah, and I think actually, I think that is actually one of the most important things to take away from how you think about a successful games industry. Is it was talking about the shift from service production to IP, and when you're doing a service job, you're doing external development, you really only need those two things, right? You only need good art and good tech, because somebody else is telling you what to do. Right. And, and you don't have to worry about selling things. You don't have to worry about communities. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff, really, any of the real business stuff, because ultimately, like, selling services is business, but it's not that difficult. It's quite a simple business. Right. But when you start developing communities and having marketing plans and strategy, and community engagement strategies, and thinking about wish lists, and thinking about, demo play times and all that sort of stuff, that's a whole other part of the business. And to me, like, it's the risk reward ratio there. Like, the risks are higher, sure, but the reward is way, way higher. Like, when you're a service company, you can only make a margin on your time. You can only make like 10%, 20% on your hours. When you start developing IP for an intangible product like a game, like where the cost of duplicating your game is zero, there's the sky's the limit, man. Like, you can make how much money you want if you're successful. But quite often, exactly to your point about, like, people don't think about it as a business, is that even the people who are training people to make video games forget about that third stool. They forget about the leg that's like, how do I actually make like help, in this case, Colombian companies, you know, how people find out about their game, how people be interested in their game, if people want to play their game, how people talk about their game. Like no one teaches that, and that's what one of my friends calls the business broccoli, because it's like no programmer wants to hear that stuff. No artist wants to hear about marketing. But if they don't hear about marketing, they're going to be working for somebody else. They're not going to be building their own stuff.
Okay.
So it's that sort of like, how do you, like, it's not only other people that you need to convince about all this business, about the business of games. It's also the games industry that you need to convince about the business of games.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, no one just goes into games industry because like they want to run a, you know, a Discord channel. Like, but you need to run a Discord channel, you know, to engage your fans, to want to understand how, and to play test, and to, you know, engage them in the development process and all that stuff. So it's that's a really important part of sort of the shift into IP, is the shift into business, if you will.
Okay, Christian, thank you very much.
I gotta go too. You got me on a roll, man. So I love, as you can tell, I love talking about games. So anytime.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much then. Have a nice
Right.
day, and we'll keep talking.
You too, man.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Daniel, Marta, thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias de verdad por esta oportunidad que nos
Gracias.
acaban de dar. Pues nada, seguiremos hablando para que en algún momento